Hey guys, so I guess right out of the gate with this chapter, one of the things I love is how quickly the tone of this chapter was set up because up to this point in this like post time skip, we were shown more or less on the surface level of basically how chaotic society has become with the villains having free reign, but now we're getting a little deeper into the weeds and seeing how society has become so paranoid just from the mere threat of the League and All for One that they've more or less devolved to turning on each other. And the tragic part is you can't blame either side in this one. Everyone is just so consumed by their fear now that they're all just acting on complete impulsive instinct, both the ones who are just trying to protect themselves and the ones just trying to live. And you know, while little seems like saving that woman are building up Izuku as the new symbol, I can't help but feel it's also meant to show just how in over his head Izuku actually is, and whether he wants to admit it or not, he does need his friends. And I think as of right now, All might be the only one to make him realize that. The only question is whether or not it's going to happen before All Might dies, or Izuku will realize it too late at the moment of his death. Personally, the latter unfortunately seems more likely. Like that feels like what's going to happen here, more or less. Um, and in and you know, in a lot of ways, the current state of the world is pretty much has the current state of the world, for basically as terrible and traumatic and depressing as it is in some ways exactly probably how All for One wants it, where pretty much everyone's true nature is really revealed, and how the society based on heroes and villains isn't isn't is never has never been was never been black and white. It was all just humans acting on their own personal desires and instincts. That's kind of more or less what we're seeing now. We're seeing just tons of shades of gray of humanity's true nature coming to light. Not hero, not villain, just humanity being itself. Uh, with that said, we get a little insight into the second and third's hesitance in trusting Izuku in this chapter. And while a lot of their reasoning is coming from the more obvious place of just disbelieving Izuku's capability of putting an end to All for One, their doubt isn't exactly unjustified either. They pretty much want to know what it is that makes Izuku so special. Because just Izuku making the decision to fully accept the burden that comes with this power isn't enough. They want to know what Izuku's going to do, what it is about what he can do that can actually say what he can do that can ultimately save like Shigaraki, because as it stands, they, and honestly us as the readers, have little to no reason, honestly, to believe that Izuku can actually save him. And even if he can, Izuku, I think, in some extent, still foolish enough to believe he'll be able to do it without making some sacrifice in the process. And they just don't see that, and they just don't see what we see, that he seems that he had that he Izuku just doesn't seem to have the willingness in order to make that sacrifice right now. Because even if he can't, then and if he can't, then how can we even hope to truly put in? Then how can we even hope to put an end to this cycle? Like, it's I honestly can't believe I'm quoting a movie terrorist here, but to quote Solomon Lane from Mission Impossible Fallout, the greater the sacrifice, the greater the peace. Izuku will eventually have to ask himself what sacrifice he's willing to make in order to save the world. And frankly, even though it was only just a theory at the time, I am becoming more and more convinced that wiping away all quirks will inevitably be that sacrifice. Either that, it's either going to be that actually, or the other thing I thought of is basically Izuku pretty much giving up his own quirk in order to destroy All for One's power. Those are the only two routes I can see this going right now. Either Izuku like pretty much wipes out all quirks in the world, or he pretty much destroys, or in the effort of destroying all for one's power, he ends up destroying his own quirk as well in the process. Those are the only two routes I see at this point. Yes, but I don't know. Yeah. Um, but again, Izuku has to be willing to make that sacrifice, and the question is he going to be able to? That's the big question right now. Um, One other thing that especially stuck out to me, continue on though, one other thing that especially stuck out to me is that how a lot of the second and third's reasonings and misgivings about Izuku are oddly enough in some ways tied to their own experiences of choosing of during the of during the like the dark times that of during the earliest darkest era of quirks. They The second and third had basically chosen in order to put their had chosen in that moment to put their faith in others, and that was the one thing that they had chosen to do, and how to a certain extent it's from through those experiences where the second and third they can almost they almost have this they almost get this feeling that it's almost this feeling where they see that Izuku's decision to distance himself from his friends also played a role in their beliefs about Izuku as well. Because despite whatever choices that the second and third had made in order to fight against All for One at the time, the one thing that they didn't seem to regret is putting their faith in others to fight alongside them. Something that Izuku has more or less rejected at this point. Like he is obviously fighting with a small contingent of All Might, Hawks, and Hawks, Best Jeanist, and Endeavor, but at the same time, outside of that little group, he's basically rejected everyone. So so because of that, that I think is something else that Izuku is going to have to come to terms with, is that in order to truly become in order to truly like save the world, he's going to have to start putting his faith in others again. Um, and something that this, but despite all that, I do, despite that, I do like how even though they weren't fully convinced by Prince Yoichi's words, the first, uh, their communion with Izuku at the end of the chapter does at the very least show they're willing to test Izuku now. And the biggest thing from here, at least from my perspective, is going to be how well Izuku managed to control. Isn't so much going to. I think this little communion that started between Izuku the second and the third now. I think the biggest thing in order to pay attention to with during this communion is that this pretty much test that they're going to, I think, put Izuku through is going to be less about how well Izuku managed to control their quirks, and more a test of his decision of the decisions he makes, because the decisions Izuku makes in battle will basically give them a clearer window of where Izuku's convictions lie at this point. And while I don't want to see Izuku fail this test necessarily, I am hoping the second and third end up walking away from this only like partially convinced. Because if Izuku managed to pretty much fully pretty much fully pretty much succeed and live up to the second and third's expectations fully, and convince them right off the bat that he is the one to end this cycle, I feel that would be a little overly cliche, especially for someone like these two who have sacrificed so much. So, yeah, I'm not saying I don't want Izuku to fail, but I am hoping that at least that he only partially like convinces them that he is worthy, because I think that there is potential here in order for this to be like a certain character arc in its own, is just slowly diving into Izuku's developing convictions of this whole thing. So, yeah, but yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, AnyList, Crunchyroll, and be sure to hit the bell to get notifications. Death Knight of Enemy, signing off. Later, guys.